Good evening, Kansas City. Thank you for tuning in to our monthly installments of our Restore KC public programs. My name is Paul Gutierrez, Director of Programs and Events, and tonight, thanks to One Kansas City Radio, we're live in the Betty Milbep Waldrop Salon. Hopefully, the goal is to reopen the Mansion Corinthian Hall as a new museum of Kansas City history and cultural heritage in late summer of 2021. Right now, our education team, our content team are really busy working with the scripts for all the galleries to welcome you guys back at that time. In the meantime, our goal is to have these virtual programs bi-monthly and to meet again in person. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce you to my new friend and colleague, Hasna Sel, who will be my co-moderator for tonight's panel discussion. Hasna?
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course, Hasna. Great. Hasna, before we begin our program and introduce our panel speakers, do you want to give a quick introduction of who you are to those who might not know you?
Okay. So I am an artist and an architect. I specialize in glass. I've done a lot of sculptures in the past, but I am some public art in other cities. But I have created this memorial on human trafficking in our city, which is why we're having this conversation today. So thank you so much for that. I did my training in Boston, and before that in England, and now I'm here at home. So it's really wonderful to be here with you and discuss this topic, which is a rising situation in every city in the United States and globally. So what we are doing today is profound, and I cannot thank the museum and our fellow guests enough.
Thank you, Hasna. Before we begin, I will let our audience know that if you have any questions or comments, please add them to the box below. I will be checking that periodically throughout the program to address any questions to our panel speakers. Tonight, our mayor could not attend, but he did send a short pre-recorded video for you guys to watch.
Of Kansas City, where we saw people who were heroic in standing for others, heroic in making sure their voices are heard, and heroic in making sure all understand the impact that human trafficking has on all of us. Thank you for being part of this conversation, but more importantly, thank you for being part of our solution. May you have a blessed holiday season, and may your 2021 be a year where we continue to make positive changes for all of us in Kansas City and beyond.
We have Christy Childs, who's the founder of Veronica's Voice. Hi, Christy.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Commissioner Scott Wagner from Kansas City, Missouri Parks and Rec.
Good evening.
Director of the Likens neighborhood, Greg Lombardi.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being on this panel discussion this evening. Before we begin, starting with Christy, if you want to let our audience know a quick bio of yourself before we begin our panel discussion.
Well, I'm a survivor of 24 years of being sex trafficked, and this was before sex trafficking was even a word. And I founded Veronica's Voice after I was able to escape the life, so I could reach back and help my sisters that were trapped. And so this is our 20th year as Veronica's Voice.
Thank you, Christy.
Mhm.
Commissioner Wagner?
Well, my name is Scott Wagner. I have been a member of the Board of Parks and Recreation since, really for a year now. Prior to that, I was a city councilman for the city of Kansas City for 8 years, serving as mayor pro tem for my last 4 years. And so today I actually work, my day job is with the Mattie Rhodes Center as the director of the Northeast Alliance Together. So I'm in this community every day, both in official governmental capacities and non-governmental capacities, and I'm very excited about that. So glad to be here this evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Wagner. Greg?
Yes, I'm Greg Lombardi. I'm the executive director of the Lycans Neighborhood Association. I'm also the executive director of a not-for-profit law firm called Neighborhood Legal Support of Kansas City. And together, the Neighborhood Association and the law firm are focused on community development in the Lycans neighborhood.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Once again, reminder to the audience, if you have any questions or comments, please add them to the box and I will address them throughout the program. Hausa, do you want to begin with sharing with our public some stats on Missouri and human trafficking?
Sure. So I did some research, and I got this data from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which says that in 2015 in the state of Missouri, the number of human trafficking cases reported are 70. In 2016, it's 140. In 2017, it's 147. 2018, 179. And in 2019, it's 233 cases reported in the state of Missouri. Of these 233 cases, the females are 201, the males are 23, the adults are 128, and the minors are 69. Also wanted to, I also found out that more than 129 women have died in Independence Avenue so far and counting.
Greg or Scott, why
And
do you
average
think...
age of them getting trapped in sex trafficking is 11 to 13.
Thank you, Hasna. Greg or Scott, why do you think Independence Avenue is a hub for human trafficking?
You know, I don't have a real answer to that other than it's been the hub for an awful long time. I think that that there's a lot of both local traffic and national traffic by over-the-road truckers that goes very close to there. So it's a convenient place. But it is amazing how many people you see involved in human trafficking on a daily basis up and down Independence Avenue. You can be there at 9 o'clock in the morning and you'll see people.
Well, I'll just add, although I would be interested in Christie's perspective on this one, but I would just remind folks that the history for Kansas City of this is where prior to it being in Independence Avenue, it was downtown along 12th Street. That was looked at as the red light district, right? And it was only when there started to be development, which includes back in the day, we had a different name for it, but the downtown Marriott was kind of that spot where when that developed, then this moved, and it moved to Independence Avenue and other places, but primarily Independence Avenue. And I think it was because, for one, the area was becoming less developed. People were moving out of it, whether it was to Johnson County, the Northland, or wherever. You started seeing much more vacancies, just much less activity that would counter what was coming. And add to it the accessibility of Independence Avenue. I mean, between the highways, the major arteries that can get you there for individuals who may be coming, wanting to come in and out of the area quickly, northeast kind of lends itself to it. So that'll be my shot. But if I can commandeer for a moment, I'd love to hear Christy's answer to this too, if she's got one.
Well, I would say, you're going to find that type of area in every city. So I don't think we're unique in that way. I was trafficked throughout the United States. Kansas City was not primarily where I was trafficked, although I did experience that here. So, it's to say why Independence Avenue. It's just wherever a spot becomes a known track and the Johns, they start to know where to find these people. And so it just becomes where it happens.
So then I would ask, how can we mitigate human trafficking in our city? I thought that by creating memorial and giving it a larger voice, we started that conversation. But how can we further that whole rhetoric? How can we resolve? How can we take a very solidified stance in addressing this issue? And that question is to all three of the panelists.
Well, I think definitely raising awareness. I think the art display, what it does is it brings in a whole nother level of type of person, that may not be aware, kind of like people that have created ballets for this topic. It is bringing a different person to the forefront to be exposed to the issue. So I think that's one way. And I think to mitigate this issue, we have to look at the root cause. And the root cause is it happens because men buy sex. And so until we really are ready to do something about that, other than just these reverse stings that happen, and there's no real education or restorative justice that's happening, it's going to continue. And we also have to create more services to give to these victims so that they can become survivors and learn to thrive in their lives and to do something different and become economically independent and not, and build this community around them that's not judgmental on the circumstances that actually got them there, the vulnerabilities that got them there. And now a lot, especially when we talk about on the streets. So when we're talking about Independence Avenue, these women are just really seen as prostitutes. And that's not the real story. So we have to change our narrative.
Well, and I'll just add to that, the discussion about that demand side, those Johns, and the reality of it is, as we've been finding since we've been having some conversations since the art installation occurred, the reality is if a John comes to the Northeast, there is very little likelihood that, one, they'll be found out, two, that a family member, whether that's a wife, as is typical, would find out. And certainly from the standpoint of an enforcement standpoint, there's very little likelihood that even if someone is caught in a reverse sting, that anything substantial will happen. So many times you will have people who will plea down their arrest. And that's frankly part of the discussion that we're having now is how can we speak to the city prosecutor about these sorts of things, and how can we really hold some people's feet to the fire to know that if you come to Independence Avenue or Kansas City in general, something's going to happen. And because until that happens, until there's somewhat of a consequence for those individuals on the demand side, you'll keep seeing the activity along the avenue. At least that's how I look at it.
Mhm. Yeah. And what's crazy is what we see on the avenue is probably maybe 3 to 5% of what's really happening in this city.
Yeah,
which is
I would agree with that. And just to give a quick example of that, back in September, we took an action along with the police department and some other agencies, fire department, health department, to look at a building on Independence Avenue at 3516. Hopefully, I don't get in trouble by actually giving that address. But what brought us there was some of the homicides that were associated with that spot. So we went in, we looked at the property, actually shut it down because of issues that the fire inspector found. But interestingly, there was an apartment in there that was being operated out of. There were several ladies who were in there. We didn't do anything because there was nothing for us to do. And people went about their business. Interestingly, there was a gentleman that we caught who was a John, who had warrants out for his arrest, had a stolen car, well, I'll leave it at that. But that's just to say, nobody knew about that going into that building. And if you multiply that many, many times, then Christy's point is very valid, and it's very true. A lot of it is unseen for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Greg,
Greg, anything to add?
do you want to?
You're muted.
No, I think the discussion has been good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Haza, do you want to talk about the memorial and how the color and its story?
Yeah. So the memorial is tablets in color and light that tell the stories of real characters of the community, the marginalized and underrepresented factions that have been silenced for nefarious purposes. It is a departure from the stylistic version of three-dimensional form in bronze that typically represents memorials. So I made an effort to step away from the three-dimensional form of a heroic statuette and bring in a story, because all of the buildings there, it's just like what Christine said a little while back, or what Commissioner Wagner said about, these are stories. These are stories that are resulting in what is happening. It's not a person. It is not a symbol. So it is a change that I've created in representation.
Christy, how do you feel about this new form of representation that Hasna has created over in the park to the public?
Well, I think it's a beautiful venue to have it public. It's outdoors. It's representation of being there specifically is good because a lot of activity happens in that area, and hopefully, those that are involved will begin to see change, change from the neighborhood, change from the leadership over there, that they're more welcoming. And there was a time when we had handed out when we were doing outreach, one time we got these Sonic cards, and so we gave the gals these Sonic cards, and they were not welcome to use their cards at Sonic because they were these known prostitutes, and so, because when you shame people, when you run people off, that is not embracing them and meeting them where they're at. because how are you going to build a relationship where maybe they might ask for help, or ask if you know where they could find help, or feel a part of something? Women on the streets feel very, I know from my own experience, you feel very ostracized and alone, and like there is nowhere to turn. And so, I personally am believe that that shift is happening, and that's really good news. It makes my heart feel good. Mm-hmm.
And I would make a quick note about the location of the Lycan Square Park. For your listeners, it's just 2 blocks off of Independence Avenue to the north, in an area where there has been lots and lots of human trafficking. And the Lycan Square Park, around the park, there has been a lot of people make deals and then come to the area around the park to carry out the transaction. And that has kind of a double and sort of reverberating effect, in that the more prostitution, the more drug dealing that happens, the more it runs regular residents out of the park. And right now, after years of this going on, there are very few houses that are actually occupied surrounding the park. It's mostly an unwatched place. And one of the great things about Hosna's work is it brings light, and it brings attention, and it brings people to the park. And that, just by its positive nature, helps to push the criminal activity and the human trafficking away. The unfortunate thing about that is, even though it pushes it away, it doesn't stop it or even reduce it in any way, shape, or form. It is a really good thing for the families and the children who really need the park and need to be able to use it. The other thing I think it's great about Hosna's work is it really has helped to bring attention to the problem and to the issue, and to have more conversations, and to get people to think about solutions. Because, I mean, I've not been involved in the neighborhood for a long time. I've been working in the neighborhood for only 3 years. But it has been a constant. The human trafficking has been a constant in the neighborhood since I've been there, and people accept it as a constant, and that really needs to change. I think part of what Hosna's work has done is to make people start to think about, how can we solve this problem, and really move forward in helping the victims get out of the horrible cycle of human trafficking.
Thank you, Greg. I want to take a quick pause and just read some comments that are coming in, and a question for us. Lucy, great job. Christy, Hasna, Greg, and Scott. Thank you, Kansas City Museum. The artwork is so beautiful. I walked there the other day, and someone just tuned in and asking us to reintroduce ourselves. So if you want to just go down the line again to introduce ourselves to those who are just tuning in. My name is Paul Gutierrez, Director of Programs and Events for the Kansas City Museum.
And I'm Hasna Sal, the artist who created the memorial at Lycan Square Park on trafficking.
Christy Childs, founder and not director, founder and president of Veronica's Voice.
Scott?
No, I'm Scott. Scott Wagner. I am a member of the Board of Commissioners for Kansas City Parks and Recreation, and director of the Northeast Alliance Together.
And I'm Greg Lombardi, the executive director of the Lycans Neighborhood Association.
Thank you again for the reintroduction. And one question, Greg, remind the audience, where is the park located?
So it is just 2 blocks south of Independence Avenue, about 2.5 miles east of downtown, and about a half mile east of Benton Boulevard.
Thank you. This question is, believe more for Commissioner Wagner. Parks are notorious hubs for human trafficking, not just in Lycan parks, but other parks in our city. How can we, as a community, make the park feel safer?
Well, I mean, what it boils down to is a concept that we've talked about here on this discussion already, and that's one of eyes. You know, you've got to have eyes in parks in order for them to drive away those things that we may not want there, whether that is sex trafficking, whether that is drug dealing, any host of bad things. And that all comes back to programming. And that programming can be very active programming where you're scheduling things and you're doing things, or it is passive programming that brings people to the park. And that could be anything from playgrounds and any number of things that people will want to go and work with. But and that's kind of the sad truth of some of this is that these are solutions that they're not new. But it is a matter of how do you create those programmings? How do you find funding for that programming, and then who does it? And that's the challenge. And as we've talked about other parks in the Northeast area, everyone hopes that Parks and Recreation has the ability to do those things. And then I have to give them the bad news that no, we don't. And that means we've got to have partners to help make that happen. But it's all about programming. It's all about getting eyes in those parks. That's what drives those issues away, in my opinion.
Well, but then you also have with that it's like if you have a balloon, and you squeeze that balloon, you're just moving the air into a different part of that balloon. So when we run it from one place to another, we're not really solving the core issue, which goes back to really looking at demand and having programs for those that are trapped to get out.
That's true. I mean, again, the red light district of Kansas City used to be 12th Street, and then development came and it drove it out. And where did it go? It came to Northeast, and there it sits. So there is, and that's the reality of it. You can move your hot spot, but in the end, if you're really going to solve the problem, then you get into exactly what Christy's talking about, and that really gets to the limitation of what each individual actor can do, and how if we can act as a group moving in the same direction, hopefully we can be more successful to deal with the problem. But that's exactly right.
Do you feel that it requires any policy change or more action from the city or city officials?
Oh, everything demands action from city officials. I was one, I can tell you that. But having said that, you've got to understand what is driving the issue. And so, as we've had, just as the example that I used earlier, if you've got a John who is caught soliciting, they go to court. You don't know which court they're going to go to, and if they can plead that down to a disturbing the peace or whatever they can plea it down to, well, then it totally defeats the purpose of trying to either get the John assistance or to embarrass them enough that they'll quit. And I know there's a better way to explain that, and Christy will correct me at the end of this. But again, when you have those ways of kind of getting out of trouble, well, then the trouble stays. And so, that's part of the discussion I think we have to have and are having is how can we change things in municipal court? How can we add some assistance or provide some things to the department as they do, the work with the Johns and they do their reverse stings? It's all of those things, and all of those things either require a change in policy, they require a change in resources and how those resources are spent. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Christy.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Hesna.
No, I was just saying that I think that it is a collaborative effort. I think that the grassroots mobilization that's going on with agencies like Veronica's Voice, and having attention, and with Lycan's Neighborhood Association and Kansas City Parks and Rec, and having the public art element. I think it is a voice that speaks together that can make a much greater resonance than everyone working at their own level. It shouldn't be really layered, but it should be a confluence of different aspects. Like I've gone to the site, I think like 30, 40 times, since its installation. And the good thing about this is that it has brought so many good, the neighborhood has come together. The neighborhood has come into the park. And from what I've understood from the art commission, one of the commissioners at the art commission, who said to me personally when I was, right, Greg, we were there together when that commissioner said that, when they were talking about renovating the park, and one of the kids came there and said, "Can we play in the park? Can we just play in the park?" That's all he wanted. But now every time I go there, it's a very interesting dynamic, because at least I see the Johns and the Tricks and the prostituted girls are outside the park, and the neighborhood is inside the park. So we've already established a very profound step, and I think that it really truly should be a collaborative effort from every division of the society that works collaboratively to make this happen.
So what I was going to say is, we live in a bi-state area with lots of different counties, and different jurisdictions. I mean, if you look at Johnson County, there's Merriam, Roland Park, Fairway, Olathe, Johnson. You know what I mean? There's just all these different things, and then on the Missouri side. So if a guy is caught over in Jackson County, so now he's fled that down. Maybe he's coming to Wyandotte County, or he's going to Johnson County somewhere in one of those areas. So it's just, or the Northland, it's just, they can move around. And there has to be a political will to do something if they really want to stop it. And I agree, there has to be on every level, from the city to the county to the state, federal government, but I think really locally is where it should begin, because we've seen things going on the federal level, and that's just, unfortunately, I don't think the help doesn't reach the people that really need it. The federal level, to me, seems to be more really focused on finding cases to put people in prison. And we've seen that even happen with minors that have been charged as co-conspirators along with their traffickers and went to prison, once they turned 18. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And I think it really has to start on the lower levels and move up.
So I have a question for Christy. And that is, Christy, you were able to get out of human trafficking and escape it. And maybe your experience can be a model, and I'm sure it is a model for lots of other people. How were you able to do that? And is that something that we can replicate for other victims?
It would be so great if it happened that way for everybody. I really did experience a spiritual miracle, so to speak, by hearing my son's heartbeat and having different, everybody's different. I was really resourceful. And even though I didn't have family and I didn't have friends, so to speak, I was resourceful, and I found things in the community to help me without exposing myself as to where I was coming from, until I was ready to share that information. And so, and I didn't have a crack cocaine addiction. I had other addictions with drugs, but it wasn't crack cocaine. I think that is such a bad drug. It really, and drug addiction is a sickness. And so we need to see it as a sickness and recognize people need the help for those things. But once, at the Safe Center, for years, I would see girls would come in and they'd be like, well, I've been in treatment 7 times, or I've been in treatment 12 times. So they'd be in these treatment facilities for maybe 28, 30 days at a time. And I'm thinking, why don't they just have a year-long treatment instead of having to repeat over and over? Because what happens is they start to get clean, they start having their feelings, they're starting to deal with these traumas that they've been running from, and now then, good luck, you've graduated drugs or drug treatment, and so now you're moving back into what? the same situation you just came from. So you're going to use drugs to numb yourself because nobody wants to perform sex acts with strangers 10 to 25 times a day. I mean, it's just nobody wants to do that.
So, I mean,
Well, but I would. Oh, I'm sorry, Greg.
I was
go
just going
ahead.
to say, if there's one resource that we could give victims right now in Kansas City, would that be an extended drug treatment program, maybe as a pilot project for 10 or 15 people? What would be the first step that you would see us taking that would be really effective?
Well, it depends. I mean, I am not going to be opposed to a longer term drug treatment for people. Definitely, we have our Magdalene KC home. And there's another long term housing program. We're community based, restoration house. They're faith based. So there's these long-term housing programs. So our women live there for 2 years, and they rent free. They don't pay bills. And once they do start working, they have to get a bank account. We work on their credit. We work on getting them economically independent by the time they leave. So, we want to expand our one house to another house. We're part of the land bank, and we're looking to do that. Unfortunately, we're not in Jackson County as we were at the time. We were not welcomed to open a home. We were not also welcome to open another place that we got with our whole collaborative effort. So, we ended up coming to Wyandotte County. So, but we serve women from Jackson County. That's not even an issue for us. But we also need to look at the equality model, which is where we look at the men who have the disposable income, that have the choice, and we have law enforcement focused on that. We have resources poured into programs like ours, and to give these women, and we know we have a transgender population out there that suffers, and so we provide these things to give them assistance to help them get out. And so what the equality model is, they decriminalize the victims. So just like if you're a victim of rape, you're not going to be charged as a criminal. And it's really been difficult, and I think it's happening finally, for people to understand the vulnerabilities and the place that a woman that is seen as being a willing participant when she's just trying to survive, is really, she's not a criminal. Now, are there other aspects where people get connected to other criminal elements? Absolutely. That happens. So, but with the equality model, we would just focus law enforcement on those that profit off of these people and those that buy them.
Well, I was just going to add, and recognize Christy's earlier comments about some of these services, and kind of the short-term nature of them. The reality is that, Paul, as you kind of talk about what's the policy change or what happens differently, for example, you've got state monies that have been cut in social services over the years. They still will, and of course their next budget's going to, well, who knows what that's going to mean as far as what they will do for mental health and drug, and social service agency support. So you talk about where's that money being spent? Well, it's not being spent on stuff like we're talking about here. We're really good at enforcing. We're not good at changing lives in the way that we're talking about here, and that's part of it. So you only get 30 days as opposed to a year or 2 years. Even some of the court mandated stuff that you find in our specialty courts in Kansas City municipal court, those are not long-term programs that people get to go in. Those are shorter programs, and that's part of the issue. Those resources to be able to put someone in a situation to help them, over time, just like Christy's described.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hasnam?
Yeah. So coming back to architecture and serving a purpose in mitigating a social illness. I was curious. I wanted to bring out this chapter by Jane Jacobs' book, "Death and Life of Great American Cities." It's a very good book, and we had to study that for urban design. But she says, I studied that like 20 years ago, but it becomes applicable now as I'm studying Independence Avenue and lichens. She says that the common problem of the dissolution of successful neighborhoods is because of the um, is, um, sorry, I get ahead of myself. Sorry. It says that streets of successful neighborhoods must have the following three features: clear demarcation between what is public and what is private space. There was like Scott Wagner said, they must be eyes on the street, eyes that belong to those we might call neutral proprietors of the street. Sidewalks must have users in it fairly continuously. So, and then she gives that perfect example of a street that really works in the United States, which is North End, which is an Italian neighborhood, and it's in Boston. And if you go there, like, and I was a student, I was there any time of the day or night. It's always active. There are people, they call kibitzers who are there on the street, and they'll always watch for you. So no one can really attack you or anything because there are 10 people to come anytime there is, anything inappropriate going on. So I know that we are doing all this phenomenal work at Lycan Park, and I was curious, wanted to ask Greg Lombardi. Greg, how can we apply the theoretical values that the researchers have established into the park so that we can change the flavor of the space?
And really, that's a lot of what we're doing. That we're trying to get eyes on the park, and there are short-term ways and long-term ways of that. And the short-term ways are we have spent a lot of time in the last 2 years talking with residents, and it's a wonderful community of many diverse backgrounds. There's a strong Hispanic community that's about 50% of the residents. There's a giant refugee community. The local neighborhood elementary school, last year there were 19 languages spoken in the school. And so we're talking with all those communities to find out what would get them to use the park. And so some of the things that we've seen are people actually want to use it for adult exercise, like going for walks. And so we've got funding from the city to fund a walking trail around the park. Another thing that we've seen is people want there to be a promenade in the center of the park that's big enough for open air markets. And so we're adding that. We're having a public art display where there'll be handprints of all the kids from the local elementary school and public officials as well, in the shape of two hands coming together around a globe, and a very welcoming thing. And so the children and other people in the neighborhood can have a sense of ownership of the park. So those are short-term answers for getting people into the park and using it. Long-term, we are rehabbing houses around the park and bringing in folks like Habitat for Humanity and Catholic Charities to build new houses around the park. So the eyes that Scott and you, Hasna, have been talking about will be there 24/7. We're starting construction. The permit was issued yesterday for the Lycans Neighborhood Community Center, which will be on the east end of the park, and we'll look out on the park. And we are going to do our darn best to have tons of programming to use both the park and the community center, and to bring the park back to life in a healthy way that brings out lots of people. And again, I think that returns the neighborhood to a healthy state of being, hopefully, and does nothing to answer the human trafficking situation, because they'll just move along. We have to deal with the underlying causes in terms of demand and in terms of assisting the victims in getting out in order to actually solve the problem as opposed to push it down the road.
But I mean, I feel like sometimes that we are in a passive aggressive way addressing human trafficking in that aspect too, because I had an incident that happened to me when I was at the park the other day. It made a profound impact for me. Was when I was just looking at the installation, and there were these two young prostituted girls, like 16, 17 maybe, and they were there, and and they saw me, and I was there. I walked up the steps, and we kind of came face to face, and they looked so scared, and I just kind of almost felt very protective about them, and I was like, what do is everything okay? And they were like, yeah, we're just here out in trouble. And I said, no, you're not. I'm just here. I did the installation. This is about you. This is to commemorate you. And she was like, is this ours? Is this about us? And we got into a conversation. We walked down the steps. We talked about the installation, and their eyes were like saucers. Like, they were so excited to see this. They had no idea they were there on the other side of the street. They had no idea that this was happening. And then I was like, okay, and I turned away, and it almost seemed like they were going home. So I feel that in a passive aggressive way, I feel that if we can just appeal to the inner nature of, because that's what they're all asking for. They're asking for love and attention, which is what they don't get from home. That is the rhetoric that I keep hearing from them. And so this is great. I mean, just that public engagement, like, instead of disenfranchising them, instead of disengaging them from the community, bring them into the community, bring them into our lives, and make them feel one of us. And I think, in my little peephole vision, that this will indeed help mitigate the situation. I mean, it's all great. Like, I have so much respect for Christy and everyone doing so much work at grassroots mobilization. But I think that at the end of the day, simplicity is also key. And how do you just give them that? They're asking for respect, they're asking for acceptance. So that's my 2 cents.
I think, to me, it doesn't sound passive aggressive. To me, it sounds very assertive, that you were assertive in bringing them in. And I mean, that's what it's about. I see you. I'm not here to lecture you. I'm not here to tell you to get out of here. I'm welcoming you. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. And it doesn't mean we're saying where your life is okay. We're just saying you as a human being, you're okay, and you belong. You belong, because the women don't feel that they belong.
Absolutely.
So, Christy, is there programming that we could do around the park or at the new community center that would sort of be directed to the victims, or something that they would be attracted to, that would be helpful to them and give them the message of belonging and being heard?
I'd have to ponder on that. I think that's a great idea. That's a good place to start. Is let's brainstorm on that. What could be something that could be? I mean, even if it's a resource center where they know they can get resources from, or.
Well, don't forget, you've got Christine's place that's opening up. It has opened up. Basically 2.5 blocks away from the park. You've got Relentless Pursuit that's going to be just a little bit down the street, but still there on Independence Avenue. And I think to that point, those resources are really beginning to populate in the area. And so I think it's really a matter of, what I always find is the resource could be a block away, but you don't know it's there. So as long as you can keep repeating where those resources are, and if there's, I just feel like we've got a lot of things developing in Northeast right now, very close to that park. And I think it's just a matter of reaching out and being extensions of it, whatever that means, that I think can be very helpful. in this instance.
And Christy, one thing along those lines, in terms of education, would it be worthwhile to have like a monthly walk up and down Independence Avenue where we hand out informational materials to people who might be victims of trafficking?
I don't want to speak on other groups or anything, but I know outreach happens. So outreach is happening. I think if
Okay.
there's, I'd have to think about that. I think there is something that maybe could be done by other people that aren't really attached to this specific kind of work, that are just people of the neighborhood, to build those relationships. You know, my concern too is, where does a girl run to? Like, I know for us, we were over off Norton for many years, and like, it wasn't advertised. Now the girls knew where to find us, and we used to give out bracelets that, you know, said something on the outside, but the inside of the bracelet had our crisis line number. You know, so there needs to be a safe place for someone to run to if someone's after them, and that happens. I mean, we had a half-naked girl banging on our door when we were over off of Truce, came running up to our door, you know, trying to get in. And she had gotten away from a situation that, you know, and so, you know, you have a girl trying to get away from a dope dealer, from a pimp, from whatever. They need to have some kind of place they can run to.
Christy and Scott, then we have two questions that might be addressed to you both. First one, Christy, is there a place we can go to find a list of resources so we can support them?
A list of resources. I would just say, I mean, of course, there's Veronica's Voice, Restoration House, this new place that's opening. There's a place over, I think they offer some kind of temporary emergency bedding over off Hardesty. I think it might be called City of Hope. I'm not sure. I'm not real familiar with them. I've just heard about them. We kind of partner with Restoration House. That's why I know a little bit more about them. You know, we can find a list that we could send to whoever your list people are here. So we could get a list of those things together.
Thank you. And that list will be available on our website at kansascitymuseum.org. That's kansascitymuseum.org. And we'll have those links for our audience as well. Another question that came up is, are these resources of information available if someone calls 311? So as a 311 caller taker, do they know what to tell that individual?
Is it 211 or 311?
Yeah, 211 would be the better option.
211.
311 only deals with city-related services. So they're good for calling on your pothole, not on that question. So 211 would be the better. I would assume, Christy, would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So to the audience, it's 211, not 311.
211.
211.
But please call in your potholes to 311. I do appreciate when you do.
Hasna?
So I've been doing research about this neighborhoods now since I got into public art and memorials. And it's a very interesting point that they bring out that I wanted to discuss with the panel, which is the dissolution of neighborhoods happen. There is a pattern to this. And why it happens is because, say there are a lot, it is the neighborhood becomes successful because of multi-use, of different agencies that are working together, commercial, residential, etc. And then the property value increases, which I'm sure is going to happen to Lycan's Neighborhood Association. I predict this, that the area around Lycan's Park is going to increase in value because, you know, it's just going to be a very rich neighborhood with the incredible creativity that's coming into that platform. And then it's going to result in successful competitors taking over the spaces and leaving out the lesser competitors, which had a part to play in the success of the neighborhood. So I feel like I feel from the outside that this perhaps may have happened with Independence Avenue, because I'm hearing that there's a lot of motels and hotels, so it's kind of like taken over the park, if you will. So I'm it's a suggestion that if we can, because when I spoke with a lot of the survivors, I found incredible poets, singers, writers of short stories. And when I look back into my time in Boston, or even in London, and there were the podiums in the park where people, there's the confluence of people who come and they engage in the evening time. There is music playing. There's, it just becomes such a rich, habitable space. So my question is, how can we maintain healthy diversity in our communities so we again don't create marginalized citizens? How can we enhance diversity?
Now, I would say that is a really difficult question, because once you develop a neighborhood that is culturally rich and exciting to be in, people who have means want to live there, and that there is a risk that those people of means will crowd out the people who are there already. And one of the ways that that happens is that tax rates go up, and that the people who are there already cannot stay because they have to pay higher property taxes. Couple of things that we're doing to try to avoid that is there is tax abatement available in the Lycans neighborhood that the city and the Economic Development Corporation of the city have created. And so if you do $5,000 worth of improvements on a house, you can get tax abatement so that your taxes won't go up at all. And that can be improvements paid by the city's minor home repair program. So we're working to identify the people who are at greatest risk and get those minor repairs made to the houses and get them tax abatement so that they won't have to leave. The other thing that we're doing is we're trying to acquire as much property as we can in a healthy way to keep gentrifying forces out of the neighborhood. And part of that too is we're trying, and this is a little into the weeds from a lawyer's perspective, we're working on getting rights of first refusal on every property that goes through the Lycans rehab process. And we have 71 properties that are in the process right now. And so if we see gentrification going on, in theory, at least, we can ourselves as a neighborhood or have our allies acquire a house and put it to a de-gentrifying purpose, like it being a prisoner reentry home that would discourage gentrification. And I think just the fact that that possibility is there discourages gentrification and keeps richness in the community. And when rehabbers come to us to rehab a property, and in our program, they have to apply to the neighborhood association to rehab a property in the program, then we encourage rehabbing and award it more frequently to people who are rehabbing for the people in the neighborhood.
I feel like I'm being invited back.
How's that?
I said, I feel like we're being invited back.
Right, and I tell you that the answer is yes. I think that would be a wonderful thing. And if you want to have your next property be in Lycans, we would help you acquire it.
Awesome.
I was just going to add, since we're doing a lot of this work as well, and Northeast wide, the thing to remember is Northeast is about 30,000 people, 6 neighborhoods. It is, for those who know the size of their municipalities, it's half the size of Gladstone, Missouri. It is hard. We talk about gentrification, but that is hard to do in an area of that size very quickly. And so, the things that Greg is talking about, helps mitigate that circumstance to a degree. But we still have in Northeast a lot of vacant lots, a lot of properties that still need to be rehabbed. And depending on what your market is, there's a couple things about the market to remember. One is, um, to be able to come in and rehab a property isn't an easy thing to do. It's not. And a lot of them would have to be rehabbed to get to what you may be seeing on the west side of Kansas City, for example. The other thing too to remember is for people who get those houses, that's where their wealth is, right? So we hope that that house appreciates somewhat, because the people who buy that house, they're trying to do wealth building themselves. And so there's a lot of things that kind of go into that question, but I also have to say Northeast has a long way to go. If gentrification ever came to lichens, holy cow, everything has worked out pretty well as far as doing something with those vacant houses. And I don't mean to be frivolous when I say that, but there's a lot of things are going to have to happen before, whether it's there or an Indian Mound or an Independence Plaza, before they gentrify. A lot of things have to happen. So I just say that because I don't want people to think, it's going to happen tomorrow, because it won't. Maybe way down the line, but not tomorrow.
Right.
And I would say that, I mean, a lot of those things are happening. Pendleton Heights has gone in the last 10 years from a neighborhood, and Pendleton Heights is to the west and a little bit to the north of Likens and closer to downtown. But it's gone in the last 10 years from a place where you couldn't sell a house for $30,000 to now there are $300,000 houses in the neighborhood. The other point that I want to make along the lines of what Scott was saying is it's a really tricky path to walk, because you don't want all of the housing that's developed to be low-income housing. You want a mix of income so that there are people of some greater means without pushing out people of lesser income, because the people of greater means bring economic opportunity to the neighborhood. They help businesses, they provide jobs. That's a healthy thing. When it crosses the line is when they start pushing people out of the neighborhood.
Sure. And that again just lends to the size of Northeast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I need to run, but Christy, we should talk, because if you want to have your next house be in Likens, we would love that.
Let's talk.
Okay, so I will get in touch with you through Hosna.
All right. Very good.
Thank you,
I
guys.
appreciate your time. Commissioner Wagner, speaking of improvements, Independence Plaza Park is slated for improvements. How will these improvements make the Independence Avenue safer, or the street safer?
So Independence Plaza Park is within what is referred to as the Paseo Gateway, which was the recipient of a Choice Neighborhood Grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. That was meant to replace the housing that that's being replaced at the former Shoto Court site at Independence and Paseo. So part of what was contemplated in that plan was sort of a community plan, some extra dollars used to make improvements within the community that everyone could enjoy. And one of those is then in Independence Plaza Park, which, for those who may not be familiar with it, is located between Brooklyn and Park, and it is bisected by Independence Avenue. And the park goes back to about 1911. It's one of the old parks in the system. So there is going to be about $800,000 spent in that park on both sides. And the idea is to make improvements that really generate good uses there. It's the same sort of things we've been talking about as far as that programming element, right? So you'll see, lighting, security cameras, new park equipment, and better ways of getting in and out of the park. We're actually having another discussion on that on the southern part of that park tomorrow. as there is a desire, I think, to bring in people who may want to use things like pickleball courts. For those who are, I am not a big pickleball enthusiast, but there are those who are. Christy, you have to go to Chicken and Pickle in North Kansas City. You'll see it in action.
I want to
I
see
know.
it.
Well, I can't even explain it, but I'm sure someone watching can. But at any rate, all that's to say that the idea is you make good investments in the park in much the same way Greg describes Likens Park. And in this case, you're stimulating interest in coming into the park, whether you are a family who wants to use the playgrounds or someone who wants to play pickleball or whatever it is that ultimately gets built on that south side. But the whole idea is the same one we've talked about. You bring people in because there's things that they want to do, knowing full well that we have some challenges. We have a liquor store across the street that from that park that has caused some issues in the past as far as the patrons who then go to the park after they buy whatever they buy. We have had actions there previously where we brought Restart to help us, and they were able to identify 9 individuals who were ready to seek some help, and got them out of the park and got them getting some assistance. And so, many of the same dynamics that we've talked about here, but hopefully that will mean some good activity, which then stimulates more people to come into the park for good activity.
I want to be mindful of our audience time and our panel time as well. We have about 15 minutes left in our program. I want to start with Christy. Just give you some time to any final thoughts, comments for tonight's program.
No, I would just say, if, people can go to our website to find out more about us, which is veronicasvoice.org. But if you haven't seen the art installation in Likens Park, I would encourage you to go. And maybe at dusk when it starts to light up, because it's a different feel with the lights at nighttime than it is in the daytime. Not that it's not beautiful in the day, but I would just encourage people to check it out.
Commissioner Wagner?
Oh, I've probably talked enough already, but but what I will say, I want to echo first Christie's comments on Hasna's work. It is spectacular. It is amazing when lit. It does tell a story, and I'm glad that she had the opportunity to share that with individuals who probably needed to hear and see that story graphically represented. So I do want to recognize that. I guess what I want to reiterate is, for those who want the story of Independence Avenue to change, it takes more than us. And it takes an understanding of what is needed. It really takes an understanding of looking out your window, and if you see something, talk about that with your neighbors, with your neighborhood association. The sad truth is that these sort of activities, and especially the ability for Johns to come into our area, is partially possible because they don't think anybody's going to say anything or do anything, or they're going to look away. And for that to change, we have to change as a community. And so that means we have to engage with people like Veronica's Voice, Christine's Place, all these other agencies that are trying to help and be a part of that change. And so, I'm fortunate in a couple of hats that I wear to be engaged in this conversation. I'm glad of it, and hope that together we can make something happen. And thank you, Paul and Hasna, for bringing us all together this evening with your great questions. And of course, I'm always a big fan of the Kansas City Museum anyway, so I'm glad to participate just for that reason alone, Paul. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Hasna, you have the finals.
I just wanted to say that right here we have 3 agencies. We have Veronica's Voice, we have Kansas City Museum, and we have Commissioner Wagner from the Parks and Rec Department. And it is really a collaboration. I think that Kansas City, particularly the Northeast, it's a rich, varied community of multiple communities that are coming together and making this neighborhood so special. I'm so blessed to be a part of this. I have, and also we have like the Kerala Association of Kansas City came forward and helped Veronica's Voice with their charity. I'm hoping to see more of these confluences, more of this intermingling between communities, because essentially we are one large community at the end of the day, and no one should feel left out. So and I truly feel that this is a great place. This community has incredibly nice people. There is a marginalized faction of the community, and we are all together here, right now, trying to address that situation. That goes to show how much we care. And this memorial would not have been possible without Commissioner Wagner's approval, without Veronica's support, without the museum now giving it the visibility it deserves. So right here, right now, it's showing a combination of different agencies coming together. I had a great conversation with my friend Jude Hans this afternoon, and he was saying that we need to bring more such conversations and bring the parks together with a shared history that really talks about unification of the neighborhood. So I think we are making great strides, great inroads into a very large movement, and I think that this is the beginning. These conversations should and will happen, and it's only going to be for the better. So thank you to all three of you for your priceless support of doing a wonderful, noble thing.
And on behalf of the Kansas City Museum, I want to thank the audience for allowing us to enter your home with this shining light on human trafficking in our city. Thank you, Christy, for helping us as well.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Wagner, and thank you, Greg. And also, Hasna Sal, thank you so much for shining light with your beautiful memorial in Kansas City.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, all.
And to our audience, just remember that our program will always live on our Facebook page. Also, thanks to One Kansas City Radio, this will be available on a podcast. Visit kansascitymuseum.org. That's kansascitymuseum.org to find out what's happening with our Restore KC series and also about the renovations and restorations of Korean Theater Hall. Once again, the goal is to reopen this museum as a new museum of Kansas City history and culture heritage late summer in 2021. Until we meet in person again, we'll continue with these Restore KC program via this platform. Stay safe out there and have a good holiday season. Have a good night.